So thank you so much for joining us, especially on Halloween. Today, we're going to be talking about accessing fish passage funding opportunities and partnerships. But before I begin, oh no, go back. I wanted to have a little bit of fun. As you can see, we're wearing some fish hats in honor of Halloween. And I wanted to bring in a little joke, a fish joke. I'm not the best joke teller, so I often use Google to help me out. And I couldn't really find anything. So if you can think of any good fish puns, let me know. So thank you for for humoring me today on Halloween, as we have a little bit of fun before diving into the content. So before we begin, I just want to give a little introduction to River Network staff who are going to be helping and supporting the webinar today. I'm Grace Fulmer. I'm the Corporate Partnerships Manager with River Network, and I'm located in Durango, Colorado. Colleen, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen McGuire. I'm the Healthy Rivers Program Manager with River Network, and I'm located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Awesome. Thanks, Colleen. So obviously we're here today to talk about funding for fish passage, and specifically as it relates to the bipartisan infrastructure law. As many of us, if not all of us, know, numerous federal agencies were given millions of dollars from this historic investment to go toward and address fish passage concerns across the country. So these investments have been and continue to engage nonprofits, tribes, government agencies, and communities to improve infrastructure and remove obstacles, obsolete and dangerous barriers to help restore river ecosystems across the country. We're already seeing a lot of the benefits of this historic investment as dollars have been being funneled into the ground for some time now, where we're seeing aquatic habitats being reconnected, flood resilience being established in communities, and really having the opportunity to address some long-term infrastructure concerns across the US. And so River Network, with all of these new federal funds that have been offered, we've been providing resources and trainings for groups working on the ground to better understand and access and also influence these federal dollars. This work has been done through our Tap into Federal Funding initiative. Colleen, if you're able to find the link, if you want to put it in the chat whenever, that would be great. Essentially, this is a space where, just as I said, we're providing resources, tools, opportunities for folks to engage with these dollars, learn about them, and hopefully successfully apply and get those dollars onto the ground. So while a lot of this funding and these opportunities have already gone out the door, projects are already happening on the ground, there are still fish passage funding opportunities to come. So in this learning session today, we wanted to provide sort of an overview of what funding is to come, and also ways, tips and tricks on how you can work in partnership or in coalition with various partners to apply for and access these dollars and then also implement them on the ground. So today we're going to be joined by two speakers. We have Shannon Boyle with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who's going to give an overview of the different funding opportunities to come, and also some ideas and ways related to coalition building to help get these dollars. And then we're also going to be hearing from Chris Collier with Trout Unlimited, who's going to be talking about their experience applying for the funds, but also their experience working in partnership. Something that we've found, and I'm sure all of you are well aware, is this space really requires multiple agencies, entities coming together and working in partnership to successfully, number one, apply for these sometimes cumbersome applications, and then receive them and then implement them. So we have a short time today together. We will have time for Q&A at the end, but as a question pops up, we encourage you to put it in the chat, and we'll have opportunity at the end to get into those questions and have a little bit of discussion. So just a little bit of housekeeping. you can please keep yourself on mute while the speakers are talking. And then again, Q&A or questions in the chat. So before we dive into the presentations, I just want to give a little overview of River Network. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit working across the country to connect and grow a network of water justice and river advocates. We focus our work in 3 areas. We have healthy, resilient rivers, climate resilient communities, and safe, affordable drinking water. And how we sort of function in this space is sort of being a connector, an opportunity to bring folks from across the country to talk about issues that they're experiencing in their communities and their watersheds, to share resources, tools, ideas, trying to sort of break down the silos that we can often find ourselves in this work. So in action, this looks like hosting webinars like we're doing today, building and creating toolkits around certain topics. We also provide some financial and technical assistance, but mostly wanting to create this space and opportunity to come together and work with one another and learn from each other. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to introduce our first speaker, Shannon Boyle with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Shannon is located in D.C. and is the Federal Interagency Fish Passage Task Force Coordinator. It is a mouthful, Shannon.
Yeah. Thank you for committing to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Shannon, feel free to share your screen.
Awesome. All right. Let me know. Okay. Can you let me know which one you're seeing? Are you seeing the presentation or the presentation notes?
Your notes.
Notes. Okay, I will switch that. Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for having me, River Network and Grace, and for setting all of this up. I'm more than happy to share a little bit of information on the myriad of fish passage opportunities that are out there. As Grace said, I'm Shannon Boyle. I work for our fisheries headquarters office at the Fish and Wildlife Service in the DC area. And for the last couple of years, I've been coordinating this task force that I'll touch a little bit on that really was born out of the implementation of the bill funding for fish passage. So today, there's a lot that could be covered, and I could probably take the whole hour, although I will not torture you with that. I want to touch on a couple things. So I'll cover a little bit of the interagency coordination happening at a high level on fish passage nationwide. I want to cover a little bit of information about our internal Fish and Wildlife Services fish passage funding opportunity, the National Fish Passage Program. And then I'll touch briefly on some other opportunities for finding fish passage funding, and then briefly on some currently open opportunities if you're looking for funding right now. So I think anyone who kind of works in the river world knows the general benefits that are provided by free-flowing rivers to kind of all of society, not just ecosystems and environmental health, but human community health and resilience as well. Functionally reconnected rivers or connected rivers are really a win-win, providing improved water quality, increased recreational access, and revitalizing local economies often, increasing people's connections to nature and access to green space, while also kind of helping to update infrastructure that's aging or out of date, and reducing some municipal costs and public safety hazards as well. So in general, we love to talk about the co-benefits provided by this work by removing in-stream barriers or retrofitting or rehabilitating certain structures that are out of date and cause significant impacts to the natural environment, but also to the communities that live in and around these structures and depend on the waterways that they impede. So this is kind of never a better opportunity, with the increasing awareness around the benefits of free-flowing rivers. It was actually really helpful to have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act funding come down from the federal government for some of this work. In general, the estimates are kind of sometimes rough estimates, but there was $2 billion specifically for in-stream barrier removal provided by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and kind of a smattering of other related funding in both the Inflation Reduction Act and other opportunities like America the Beautiful. So when all combined, especially when you start to look at the complementary activities in terms of nature-based solutions and other kind of aquatic habitat related activities, there really are billions of dollars available for this type of work. One of the reasons or one of the things that kind of came out of this windfall of funding was a recognition that federal agencies could do a little bit better at working together to implement this funding. One of the things that was really noticeable about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funding was that it didn't go to just a single agency for all of these activities. It was distributed across 8 or 9 specific federal agencies, all with similar and overlapping and complementary missions and authorities, but slightly different as well. Some folks like NOAA and Federal Highways got fish passage funding that is mostly targeted on the coasts and within the limits of anadromy, while other agencies like Forest Service working on Forest Service lands or Fish and Wildlife Service working nationwide, et cetera. So there's a real recognition for the need to collaborate, coordinate the implementation of our funding so that we can have a real strategic and impactful, and at the outset, a larger opportunity to have a big impact on the landscape when this is all said and done. So in 2022, we did establish a voluntary group. Sorry, my cat is hungry, so he's going to be bothering me. But in 2022, we voluntarily established the task force. There are 13 member agencies, all of those which received funding for fish passage, as well as others that may not have gotten direct funding, but can support these efforts in other ways or through regular appropriations. We have continued to seek input from partners and key stakeholders on a lot of the activities and priorities that the task force is focused on, most recently in a series of larger workshops. And we've continued to kind of incorporate a lot of that feedback into our work planning and action agendas for the future. At a high level, some of our key objectives are really targeted at making this work easier to do in the long term, building capacity both within the agencies and within our partner organizations to conduct this work and to support this work in a variety of ways on the technical side, compliance side, and implementation side. We also recognize that there's a real importance in kind of building awareness for the benefits of this work, not just from an environmental standpoint, but from a climate resilience to communities and a public health and public safety standpoint as well. Of course, there's a ton of opportunity to strategically implement projects in coordination with each other at a high level within the federal government. And that's been one of our biggest priorities, is really trying to figure out how us as a federal family can prioritize in new and different ways that we haven't really had to address in the past, because this is a once in a generation funding opportunity. A lot of our other kind of key objectives and high level objectives are weaving in opportunities to reduce burdens on applicants, reduce the burden on underserved and underrepresented groups, especially tribal nations across the country. And also at the outset, which weaves together all of this, is really developing a model for strategic communication and collaboration that outlasts bill and IRA and really sets us up for working better together for the implementation of all nature-based solutions or fish passage related funding. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the task force because I want to talk more so about our funding opportunities. But I do want to just quickly mention, because I'll bring it up a little bit later in the presentation, that we are pursuing an initiative right now with the task force to gather awareness and distribute that awareness amongst all of our partners on these transformational fish passage projects. There's a general kind of like soft criteria that we're trying to focus on. But at the simplest kind of level, these projects are really those that are models for other projects on the landscape that are trying to seek fish passage funding over the long term. And the federal agencies are really trying to use these as opportunities for collective investment and for creative ways to braid funding. We are continuing to collect these types of projects. If you're interested, there's more information in some of the links that I dropped in the chat. I'm happy to take some questions later. So before I move on to our National Fish Passage Program, I do just want to give a little bit of a demonstration of the investment to date so far from Bill across the federal family. So we are 2 to 3 years in, depending on which agency you are and what timeline you're working on. But just about half, if not a little bit more at this point, of that $2 billion available for fish passage funding has already been awarded on the landscape. There are 9 federal agencies that have distributed funding to date to over 600 projects, variety of different types of approaches being used on the landscape, national in scope, while still taking into account each individual agency's missions and authorities and jurisdictions as well. So since our last update on this dashboard, we definitely have already crested $1 billion going out to our partners to implement these projects. And this is going to, of course, continue to climb as we start to implement the last few years of bill funding. So I'll shift now to the National Fish Passage Program. Many of you may be familiar with it. I hope so. If not, now's a great time to learn a little bit about it. We're very, very proud of the program within the service. We really see it as a great model for collaborative conservation work nationwide. Unlike some programs that were established in the bill in 2022, the National Fish Passage Program has been around for decades. It was first established in 1999, and it really is a cooperative conservation program that works with kind of all voluntary partners. And it actually has one of the most flexible eligibility requirements, where it really can work with most entities that are interested in conducting this work. As long as they are, have all of the relevant and necessary approvals for their barrier or structure. One of the other unique components of the National Fish Passage Program is that we work nationwide, truly. So we work in both coastal and inland waterways, and there's really not very many habitats that we wouldn't work within. We're also very focused on 3-dimensional or multi-dimensional habitat connectivity or aquatic connectivity. There is, of course, a big component of focusing on longitudinal connectivity, reconnecting rivers by removing in-stream barriers. But we're very much so focused, and even more and more so with the bill funding, on maintaining and improving and restoring lateral connectivity to floodplains, wetlands, riparian areas, et cetera, these kind of other habitats that are often overlooked when we're thinking about strict in-stream barriers. We also are very flexible on our match requirements, which makes us very attractive in general, especially for underserved communities that may not have as much access to matching funds. We do track leverage dollars, and generally there is a bit of a kind of a scoring boost if leverage funding is provided in the program or in the proposal, but no match is strictly required through our program. This is kind of how we've been operating since the program was established in the 90s, and we've had a long-running history of success. And I think that was one of the main reasons why the NFPP was landed with $200 million in the bill for the 5-year implementation period. That $200 million a year, or $200 million over 5 years, increased the program's funding opportunity from $15 million a year roughly to $55 million a year. So increased it by 40 million. It was a huge infusion of funding, and we have kind of worked quite quickly to get it out of, on the landscape. A quick summary so far of where we're at. Of course, we're several years into the bill timeline, which was essentially 5 years, FY22 to FY26. Because NFPP was an established program with an established network of partners and known projects, we were actually one of the first programs to be able to implement projects or select them when the bill funding came out. So at this point, as of October 24, we actually have already awarded and selected 4 years of our 5 years of bill funding. So in this last year, we were able to select up to 2 years of project funding. And at this point, we have awarded $143 million of our $200 million. So we have 1 year left. A quick glance of our projects so far. We have 122 awards across our 3 rounds of funding. All told, that's totaling about 346 barriers on the landscape. So many of our awards are addressing more than one individual barrier. One of the things that we're the most proud of, and it's been a central tenet of implementation of our program, is the way that we've been able to award funding to 40 states as well as Puerto Rico. This is a huge kind of focus of our program. We are very proud of the fact that we can deliver funding nationwide, and we have kind of worked to ensure the geographic equity of the distribution of our funding. Some of these other numbers are really impressive too. Our 346 barriers, when removed, will restore and reopen over 12,000 miles of stream habitat and over 900,000 acres of wetland or floodplain or other aquatic habitats. So a little bit more of a high level overview of kind of the practical nature of our funding. As I said, we do have $40 million a year from that bill funding. After some administrative and project management support dollars and takedown, that's around $35 million available per fiscal year for projects. And that is what is included in our notices of funding opportunity that come out for every round of our funding. As I said, we've awarded 4 of our 5 years. So we do have 1 year remaining that we are expecting to be available in 2025. And I'll get into some of those details in a minute. One of the things that we've always done within NFPP and has been has gotten even more attention with the bill funding is the importance of funding all phases of a project, not just that construction or implementation phase. In order to support a healthy, long-running pipeline of these types of projects, we really need to be investing in the pre-planning and feasibility, the design and engineering, the permitting and compliance, as well as the implementation and construction. And many of these other project phases include things as simple as communication and outreach, community engagement, and capacity to do this work. NFPP and many of the fish passage bill opportunities across the federal family are really looking to fund various phases of a project to support that longer timeline of implementation. Our program, we do accept proposals up to 10 million. Even though we only have $35 million available, we do have a competitive funding process, and we are looking to fund projects in general that are looking to braid kind of diverse pots of funding together and seek large scale landscape or watershed scale impacts. So we do accept up to $10 million worth of proposals, but don't have any strict, other than that, any strict minimum or maximum on our awards. The selection criteria in general, I'll get into a little bit more detail in a minute too, but as you may be picking up, we are very much so focused on the ecological and the community benefits braided together, and especially just the way that that's articulated in the proposals. So every fish passage program and every agency has a slightly different process for applications. And I'm sure everybody's very familiar with this, or the variance anyways, between different agencies. Ours is, taken it upon ourselves to be very intentional about the simplicity of our proposal and our application process, especially with so many funding opportunities available out there, as well as the collaborative nature of our program, where partners often work directly with Fish and Wildlife Service staff to develop projects and kind of support proposal development. We have a very simple application process and have continued to improve this every year based on feedback from some of our partners after each round of funding. So typically, we don't have timelines, specific timelines for our next funding opportunity that will likely come out next fall, but this is a rough schedule that we do expect will be relatively similar to what we can expect to see for our next round. It generally is kind of initiated through a letter of interest from the project proponent to our Fish and Wildlife Service staff, kind of explaining a brief explanation of their interest in seeking funding and a brief explanation of the project. There's then a phase where there's a collaboration between our Fish and Wildlife Service staff and project proponents on the actual proposals and application process. And then a certain, over a series of months, there's the review process and final selection. The main kind of piece here is that this letter of interest is meant to be a very brief, kind of simple statement about the project, understanding that if the project is not viable or if it's not quite time or it may not be as competitive, and this is kind of at the discretion of our Fish and Wildlife Service staff and the partners communication, they don't have to go through the process of submitting a full proposal before kind of receiving some feedback from our Fish and Wildlife Service staff. So we have really intended for that to be kind of a burden reduction component of our application process. So I won't go into too much detail about this. We do have a lot of information included in our past notices of funding opportunity. I'd also be more than happy to provide some additional information on all of that. But I do want to touch briefly on just the general priorities for our NFPP bill program. All of this is captured ultimately in our NOFO in the selection criteria. And we are, in our proposal, we do ask for kind of relatively detailed explanation of how the project is going to meet some of these priorities ultimately. The biggest piece here is that we really are looking to blend the ecological resilience, ecological benefits, climate resilience. Okay, go on. Sorry. As well as the community and infrastructure resilience benefits. The ecological component of our program is still kind of the top priority, given we are most focused on the fish and aquatic species and their habitats. But more and more, we are looking for projects that are blending these two kind of sides, the social and the ecological components. So looking at opportunities and this, I would say that this can offer a lot of opportunities to capture additional funding on the environmental justice or gray infrastructure side of things, and also offer opportunities to partner with novel entities to kind of seek a broader set of benefits for the community and environment in general. More and more too, and this will likely become even more important in our final funding opportunity, we really are looking to achieve significant watershed scale benefits. So looking for those opportunities to not just address a single site-specific issue, but really look at the broader geographic context. Who else is working, in the area? What are some of the other opportunities and benefits that could be achieved if we partnered with folks upstream or downstream or in the watershed in general? We're really looking for this bill funding to be an opportunity for transformational change across the landscape, and rather than kind of more so random acts, which none of this is random acts, but we are trying to encourage that watershed scale thinking.
Shannon, before you, I just want to say just a few more minutes.
Yeah, I have just a couple more slides and I
No
will
worries.
fly through them.
Thanks.
So as I said, this is kind of a repetition. We do have a final funding opportunity coming out likely in the fall of 2025. Keep an eye out for that. We will likely do a ton of outreach. It will look similar to our previous funding opportunities, but we're excited to have one final round of bill funding available. Okay, the last couple of things I want to mention is the demand for river resilience work is not going anywhere. For our National Fish Passage Program, we have seen requests for funding increase every year. And so far, there's of course some overlap here, but so far we've totaled the demand for our $143 million worth of funding to be over $1.3 billion. We also have another metric from our Transformational Fish Passage project list. That's about 70 projects totaling almost $2 billion. So the demand for this funding is not going anywhere. And we're going to continue to see this increase, I think, as we get more awareness built for the benefits of this work. That being said, there's a ton of other funding out there. There are many resources available to help everyone find this type of funding if there is interest. The Fish Passage Portal is something the task force put together. There are several federal programs that fund fish passage work listed on the portal. There's also some other federal and non-federal resources. National Wildlife Federation has a great NVS database, and then there's the recently launched conservation.gov, which has a matchmaking tool and some other additional information on funding opportunities. Lastly, there are 4 programs currently open for fish passage work that we have partnered with in a variety of ways. Just earlier this week, NOAA released their 3rd and final round of fish passage funding through the bill and IRA, both one for kind of all entities and one specific tribal set-aside funding opportunity. Those are both closing in February. There's information in the document I dropped in the chat on webinars and additional information regarding those. We do expect there to be kind of other NIMS kind of habitat related funding opportunities in the near future, but we don't have a ton of information on that yet. There's a Reclamation Environmental Water Resources Project funding opportunity available closing in March, and the Protect program through federal highways is open also until February. And there are several other opportunities that will come out in the next year or two, similar to our NFPP funding. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much. Happy to take some questions at the end.
Thank you, Shannon. That was an awesome presentation. I'm already seeing some questions in the chat. I'm hoping that we're going to have time for them at the end, but Shannon, if you're able to kind of scroll through some of them and answer them just in the chat, that would be great too. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to our next speaker. We have Chris Collier with Trout Unlimited. Chris is the Great Lakes Stream Restoration Manager and is located in Wisconsin. And Shannon, if you can stop your screen share so that Chris can hop in, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. Hi, everybody. Is my share coming through? Awesome. Yeah. Thanks. So I'm Chris. I'm the Great Lakes Stream Restoration Manager for Trout Unlimited in northern Wisconsin, based in Green Bay. And that Great Lakes Stream Restoration Manager is just our fancy internal name for a project manager. I'm going to try to make it so we have some time to chat for some questions at the end here. So sorry if I move through some things fast, but feel free to stop me. I kind of just want to introduce Trout Unlimited and why we're in this realm. Talk a little bit more about why we're working on aquatic organism passage and really give multiple views of why we're involved in it besides the obvious. Go through a few project examples, really touching on the partnerships there, how we form them and why they really help drive these projects along. And then touch a little more on funding and how we kind of pursue and catalog funding opportunities with our projects and with our partners. So first, introduce us. For those of you that don't know or haven't bumped into a TU chapter, I work for TU National, so it's a little different, but in the end, we are one TU. Our vision is for communities across America to engage in the work of repairing and renewing our rivers, streams, and other water bodies on which we all depend. So I think we oftentimes get viewed as that fly fishing organization, but we really are a cold water river conservation group that just happens to have been started by a group of fly anglers in Michigan. So that's we really look at restoring the river processes, not just the fish in them, kind of the build it and they will come whole ethos of things. And our mission is to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover these rivers and streams so that our children can experience the joy of wild and native trout and salmon. So our Northern Wisconsin team, we're a nationwide organization. We're a pretty big nonprofit, but we operate with pretty small staffing teams. Myself as the restoration manager, my colleague Scott is our restoration specialist, which, fortunate for us, we found an engineer that wanted to do our restoration design project for nonprofit salary. So it's great to have a licensed engineer and heck-ass wizard on the team. And then Danielle is our project coordinator leading our monitoring efforts with projects. So we're a team of 3 that's covering basically all of the northern Lake Michigan watershed in Wisconsin and the South Shore of Lake Superior. So we cover a lot of ground with a team of 3, with Scott actually being 2/3 of a person because we share him with our UP team. We really stress partnerships and the importance of bringing in different parties with different expertise to share project loads rather than, working in our silos. So our bread and butter of our work on the ground here, TU has a lot of different work we work on, but with my team in Northern Wisconsin, we're really looking at reconnecting and restoring cold water habitat. And that's looking at both our aquatic organism passage, which is the focus of what we're talking about today, but also doing some restoration too in areas that have been impacted either through land use changes, unprecedented flooding resulting from climate change we've been experiencing more and more, or any other impacts we're seeing. And I just have to give a shout out to our volunteers. We wouldn't be TU without them. They contribute a lot each year to our projects, but often they're the ones in the communities. That's where we have our army of thousands of people out there really making a difference in their work through, some of the photos here are from a Veterans on the Fly weekend they host every year on the St. Croix River in Northwest Wisconsin. And then down on the bottom right is a group our volunteers put on. It's a youth camp looking at restoration, experiences, learning to fish, just getting outdoors and exploring the stuff, bringing in partners like the DNR and such to do some pretty cool activities. So I just want to give our volunteers a shout out because they don't delve too much into our fish passage work, but they really are a foundational part of what we do as a whole. Okay, so aquatic organism passage, our fancy term for fish passage, which just is trying to reference that we're trying to get all aquatic organisms that move or require movement at some point. And a fun little note there is of like the 117 native fish species in Wisconsin, all of them move at some point for another, for some point in their life cycle. So it's not just the big iconic, trout, lake sturgeon, northern pike, it's everything. And then also species that we view as largely immobile, like mussels, they require movement in their larval stage attaching to fish. So having movement is incredibly important to all aquatic and even some semi-aquatic organisms. And why? Well, it's infrastructure, but it's really infrastructure in our line of work. Sorry for the pun, had to do it. So why? Well, it's because we're looking at reconnecting cold water habitat. That's why TU first delved into this space. But with most of our work, we don't get stuck on that one thing. And how do we, this will come back and bring out the partnerships. We're also looking at accommodating greater flows, looking at flood resiliency. And then that dives into protecting communities, resources and recreational opportunities by promoting, flood resiliency, more intact river systems. Shannon touched on this, she's kicking things off. All these things that free flowing or unencumbered rivers bring these benefits beyond just that one primary target. And in the end, this is all investing in communities and resiliency. Resiliency today, and then also looking at resiliency to climate change, now, but 50 years in the future as well. Diving in more why to use particularly in here. Obviously, our iconic species that we gravitate to as a cold water group, trout and salmon, they move a lot. They're the some of them iconic migratory fish species. Even stream resident brook trout, make some pretty impressive runs. So it's not just, Snake River salmon or looking at Bristol Bay, Alaska. It's, that 20-mile long tributary in the North Woods of Wisconsin really has some impressive migrations for fish. And aquatic organism passage we find is often encumbered in headwater streams where there's really important habitat for cold water refugia, places that stay cold when it's hot, and also for spawning habitat. And then if anybody pulls up a map of northern Wisconsin, turns on a rivers layer and turns on a roads layer, it is just astounding how many roads just run through an area that's dominated by the Chequamegon Nicolet National Forest and other private lands. It is kind of disgusting, but there are a lot of roads, and that map doesn't even count on all the forest roads that have been put in there over the past 150 years that are unmapped and have falling apart roads, railroad grades, culverts that are encumbering these streams. So there's a lot of ground to cover, and that's just looking at one part of one state. Diving into the human impacts of this too, we really have gravitated to this realm to really build out our partnerships and how we can get this to resonate with people that might care about fishing, but they're not going to make a decision on a tight town budget because a brook trout can't get through that culvert. There's a really real human component to this work, and it's because road stream crossings can increase flood risk, which is something in the northwestern part of the state, my south shore of Lake Superior zone. They've had 3 500-year plus flood events in the past 10 years. So we know that 500-year or what enter number here per year event is throw out the window, but it's still astounding what they've been dealing with. And that's one of many crossings where that road just liquefied and left the crossing there. Other ones where one would fail and just precipitate downstream, blowing up the next one, then the next one, then the next one. They had railroad bridges go out because of all the debris buildup from tiny upstream culverts that were then impacting larger culverts down by the more populated areas. So it's a really big issue that threatens infrastructure, community resiliency, and human life in a lot of cases. And this is where we're really seeing a lot of partnership and building these coalitions that go beyond the natural resource groups, the typical actors in this space focused on fish passage. This is an event we hosted up in Hayward, Wisconsin, which is a city, but it's a pretty sparsely populated area. And we brought out 30 people right in the throes of the COVID pandemic. This is pre-vaccine, still pulling people out, finding a way to get people out to talk about this because it was a huge issue and people wanted to get out and continue working on this. So we've invested heavily in culvert replacements, obviously from the fish side of things, but also because we're on the ground, we're in communities, and we see the momentum we can build by approaching these from fish passage and flood resiliency projects. And this building local capacity is really helping to expand our funding portfolio, both for us, but for towns, counties to expand their budgets, to look at crossings, proactively to address things before they become a problem, but also to react in a better way, knowing like, okay, we didn't have a chance to get this one figured out, but we know what we should be looking for here rather than just replacing with what just failed. So I want to kind of touch on these partnerships I've been hinting at. And partnerships drive our work. You hear it a lot from conservation groups and in general nowadays is these partnerships really leverage opportunities. Shannon looked at leveraging funding, and it can be hard for one organization to develop a huge road stream crossing project and also be chasing down leveraging non-federal dollars. Bringing in partnerships helps to really open up doors to other funding opportunities that otherwise you don't have time to do everything at once. Share the load, not have to juggle everything yourself. So what we do when we approach projects is we really look down with our core project team, and we do have a loose group of collaborators in northern Wisconsin, with the DNR, a couple other state agencies, the U.S. Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and we'll identify who should we bring in here. Obviously the road owner, but look at local governments in the area too that might not own the road but would have a stake. Could be an important transportation route for their communities. We look at tribal groups, bring them in. We work in the ceded territories of a couple different treaties and really bringing them in, getting their opinion and getting their thoughts on what the appropriate way to approach a project would be is very helpful. And then we looked at even volunteer-led outdoors groups, or in some cases lakes and rivers associations of homeowners, bringing them in to discuss what we're looking at. We start that outreach early. We don't want to get too far along because you do run into opposition, or if you wait too long, you'll find out somebody might have been like, we could just remove this road. And that's really the first question we ask in every project is, can we remove this road? And 95% of the time, the answer is no. But sometimes by starting that project outreach, you can get people to be like, what if we just got rid of this? So that can be the ultimate project success there. But we start that outreach early so that we can get everybody involved and not surprise anybody later on with, wait, what are you doing here? And that includes trying to get regulatory people on the ground too, which they're oftentimes swamped in our realm, but getting them on the ground helps avoid any hiccups when we just show up with an application 2 years later. We also really stress with that identifying partners, meet the partners and stakeholders where they are, especially talking to tribal governments and local governments. They don't have the time or the travel budgets or the desire, or really they shouldn't have to drive to wherever you are. go meet them in the community, talk about things, and then take a trip to the crossing when you've built that momentum and that interest. We find that's been really successful, and it's a lot better than just sending emails to accounts that you don't get anything from because they're too busy dealing with 6.5 other things. And then also realize the complexity of each project early on and learn how to communicate that to the partner's interest and their language. Don't go out throwing all your biological jargon around or whatever way you're approaching this. Approach this for how you think a community is going to resonate to it. I oftentimes meet with a local leader and won't mention trout until we're just talking about, hey, have you ever fished this later on? It's talking about, what are the damages you're dealing with here? Do you have any issues with this? Like when we get a rain on snow melt event and we just have all that water coming off when the ground's still frozen. What happens after a summer thunderstorm here? How often are your road crews stuck with this? Really trying to get that, how is this person or how is this party going to resonate with this project or connect to it? And then also find ways to get everybody involved. Keep them involved throughout the process. Some of these projects can be quick, especially when there's an emergency to address with it. But a lot of times we're talking 2 to 4 years from start to finish, even on smaller projects, sometimes longer on the bigger ones, just to cobble together funding. Find ways to get everybody involved, whether it's helping out with survey work, whether it's reviewing designs, or just being involved in regular, even twice a year project updates. Don't just rely on them cutting a check for it, because in some cases that's just not an option. And their value as a partner can be having that local tie-in, so you can have that community liaison with you, and find a way to get them involved though, and stay involved and stay engaged so that they remember the importance and feel like a valued part of this coalition you're building. So now I want to jump into a couple project examples. Focus on some smaller ones we worked on with smaller partners, where we didn't just have, like as I mentioned, we work with the Oceanic and Nicolet, and we can get a lot of work done with them because being the Forest Service, they have access to a lot of funding and a lot of internal funding sources that makes it easy to leverage and bring in other funding that TU is applying for. But this is on a tributary to eventually getting out to Lake Superior in northwest Wisconsin. It's a Class 1 trout stream, which was our highest classification. At this site, there were multiple culverts. You can see in the top left photo, 2 culverts there. Created a full fish passage barrier based on our assessments through channel constriction and increased velocities. And this was a smaller project. That the finished picture on the bottom right there that's about a 10-foot pipe culvert we put in. Pretty simple project, which is great because this was working with the road owner and primary partner here was the town of Solon Springs. They're small. They don't have a huge road budget, but they were fully excited for this project, and just, they brought in some money to do some riparian plantings afterwards, to do some restoration on the margins from where there was going to be impacts. And that was awesome because then we were able to partner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the National Fish Passage Program we just heard a bunch about, and the Trout and Salmon Foundation, which gives small grants out for cold water conservation work, to purchase and implement purchase the culvert and hire the contractors to construct it. So it was a great example of, we didn't need the town to be engaged beyond signing an agreement, but find a way for them to get engaged. It was awesome because this just means so much more to that community now because they were involved in it. So it's just a great way. If we could just been like, hey, just sign this agreement that says we can do this, and we'll we'll let you know when it's happening. But just finding more way to be involved, I think, made this more meaningful for everybody. Another one I want to touch on, one of our tribal projects. The Forest County Potawatomi community they have the reservation lands in northeast Wisconsin, and it overlaps really closely with the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. And in this case, there was a creek, Colburn Creek, that was a very important historic cultural resource for the tribe. There was a forest road that came through here that the tribe had no business or responsibilities with, that was creating a full barrier, actually cutting off habitat to 3 different tributaries upstream of it, all of them classified trout water. And the tribe was struggling to really build momentum for this project, not wanting to commit dollars to something that wasn't their infrastructure to maintain, and it was off reservation lands, but really wanting to build support and the importance for it. So TU kind of came in as a connecting liaison there. So the tribe didn't have to enter into these kind of difficult contracts. You don't need to get into the tribal issues between the tribe and the state DNR and their template contract language. But we were able to come in and kind of take the tribe's assessment of this project and take the lead on getting it implemented with the DNR and with the Forest Service. And it was a really cool way to come in and not just focus on how did we get the tribe to give us Bureau of Indian Affairs money. It was more like, no, how can we come in and rectify this problem so you can invest your resources, downstream where this is on tribal lands. It was a big project. You can see a concrete box culvert there. It's a very rocky stream with multiple threads coming in, so it's very difficult to get into a crossing there. Fortunately, not one we can abandon because there's lots of people that use this road, and it's one that's maintained through winter. So we had to get creative and go a little harder on the infrastructure side of things. That was a cool project, and it was my introduction to working with tribes, and I thought it was just a really cool model of how we can work with the tribe to achieve multiple benefits throughout a watershed without them having to commit massive resources to a project, and instead finding a partner that can help bring in outside funding. This was a fun one to work on for me when I first started here about 5.5 years ago. Last one. This is the fun one we're working on now. This one's ongoing. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 culverts there. This crossing's failed 5 times in the past 10 years. And if you ask the town chairman, it's fine. They fixed it. So this is one of a test of patience. If you look at this culvert on the far left right here, that is spray foam and sandbags from the last failure. They have pulled plastic pipes inside of the old failed metal pipes and attached them with spray foam and sandbags. It is a work of something. There's actually more concrete and lack of void spaces here than culvert capacity. So this thing is a dam for all intents and purposes. It nearly overtops every year just from snow melt, which is why it failed so much. There's a strong push from the DNR and from the county to get this addressed because it is it's a paved road, which is rare up north. It's an important road in winter again, and it's important. There's a lot of residences around here. So it actually is a very important road. And the town is they don't want to deal with government. They don't want to deal with government funding. They don't want anything to do with that. It's fine. They'll keep dealing with it as it is. We were able to come in and kind of take that. Let's take a multiple year approach, start developing this on the back end slowly and try to get the town to buy into this. And eventually dig in and be like, listen, we're going to be taking this headache off your plate every spring. Like, you won't have to worry about this again. And now it's moving forward. We're going to implement it next year with a combination of funding from the county. The town is chipping in some. And then once again, the National Fish Passage Program is contributing funding to this project. And the DNR is bringing some trout stamp funding to it. And it's just a lesson in being patient, because this is one of those you drive to like, oh, this is going to be easy. Like, this has to be the biggest headache in the world. Let's get this thing fixed. It's going to be a great photo op afterwards. And it was 2 years of just having to kind of keep going and showing up with a smile and getting the town to eventually buy in. It's going to be a single culvert, so it's going to be fun to go from, it was 3, it went to 5 3 years ago culverts, and then we'll get it to 1. And fingers crossed, they're never gonna have to think about it again, which is kind of the goal of our work that we pitch. Do it once, never deal with it again in your career. Last thing I'll touch on funding here. I think Shannon really hit this really well. So, I'm happy to let Grace share this with everybody afterwards, so they can just have a list of some of the funding we work with. So I'm not going to run through everything, but just, federal agencies, like Shannon had mentioned, we work with Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation deals with both private and federal funding, and state funding, or all government funding opportunities we go through, from stuff like the Fish Passage Program and Fish Habitat Partnerships to internal agreements with the Forest Service, which is a unique mechanism there to get funding passed along, and also looking at kind of their subsidiaries between like the National Forest Foundation and looking at Good Neighbor Authority and stewardship partnerships they offer. State funding, we have surface water grants in Wisconsin, we have trout stamp funding, and we just try to work closely with our fisheries biologists and water resource leads with the state to see what funding we can bring in, and then we'll apply for some competitive funding sources. Still kind of in our traditional realm, but getting a little more non-traditional here. Looking at mitigation funding. We've got some dams and waterways up here that have mitigation funds, compensatory mitigation that we apply for watershed restoration to offset the impacts of those dams. So we look at that. Corporate funders, my favorite one right now, Bell's Brewing out of Michigan. They have every year they do a small grants program, which is not going to fund a whole project, but 5,000 can make a difference. So we've done 3 years of projects that have been involving riparian plantings, getting products on the ground with Bell's. So nice photo op with Two Hearted, which is just great beer for TU to be taking photo ops with. And then foundations. A lot of foundations have climate resiliency programs, water quality interests, and then, like I mentioned, the Trout and Salmon Foundation. They care about trout and salmon, so it's great for trout stream projects. I saw a question come through about this excuse to drink Two Hearted IPA. Yes, it is. And then getting into the gray infrastructure side of things, this has been really what Bill and IRA have sped up immensely, but what we were knocking on the door beforehand. FEMA, state emergency management agencies. I know FEMA is a 4-letter word, but man, they have a lot of money. Department of Transportation, state DOTs, and the federal highways. And then looking at local roads and infrastructure cost share offered to the state oftentimes. Those are all opportunities out there that traditionally, when you're talking fish passes, they're like, no, we're dealing with an infrastructure problem. Bringing them together and looking at those multi-benefit projects is how we're starting to unlock some of that and being able to leverage traditional fish passage with a gray infrastructure funding pot. Funding lessons learned. The same as IDing your partners. Develop your potential funding list early on in your project and start, talking to those funders and saying, hey, I've got something coming up. What do you think of this? And start and kind of do project pitches with that. Figuring out your timelines to know when certain funding might come around is important, but I really think just taking some of those funders out and about. You likely have local reps for all those funding programs. Get them out and talk about stuff. Talk shop, pitch projects, and it can be a cool way to unlock some projects. Yeah, just do that outreach and, have your list and pay attention to like grants.gov and other listservs and stuff, but find your local contacts and take them out. It's a great way to kind of get their attention on what you're working on, is getting them out in the field and seeing like, so what we're working on, what are you looking for? Does any of these fit your program? And kind of find where things might fit better with certain programs than others. And that's what I've got. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chris. So many good nuggets of info and some ideas in there. Really appreciate your time. We have about 3 minutes, maybe a little less, for 1 or 2 questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Colleen to do that.
Yeah, and folks, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I see that Shannon did answer a few of them already. And if we can't get to all of them, then we can send a follow-up email. But Shannon, one, I guess, just overall question. I know there's a lot of folks in the chat with like very specific project related questions. Who's the best person that they should reach out to when they have those questions?
Yeah, so it depends. So if you have kind of a regional or site-based question, I would definitely refer you to, we have in our Fish and Wildlife Service offices, we have regional coordinators for the program. They would definitely be your best bet. I will pull the link up to our contact page and drop that in the chat. So depending on where you sit, you can kind of look at the list and reach out to the coordinator. You're also welcome to email me and I can kind of make the connection. But our regional coordinators are definitely the most informed, most helpful. They can connect you with some of our field staff and things like that to talk through details.
Thank you. And one clarifying question, you talked about the Transformational Fish Passage Program. Is that's separate from the National Fish Passage Program?
Yeah, so the Transformational Fish Passage projects, that's really kind of a way to, it's not a funding opportunity. It's a way to kind of gather and grab information on high priority projects from our partners. And then, especially when we're talking about some of the gray infrastructure agencies that Chris just mentioned, like FEMA and highways, we can kind of seek that information from our partners and connect partners to some of these other agencies with lots of money or things like that, and connect some of our technical assistance and things. So yeah, they are separate, but very related.